Good morning or good evening. Excuse me. It's about 1:15 here in Tucson. It's about 12:15 in Los Angeles. It's 3:15 in New York, and it's about 8:15 in London. Uh, you remember what this is all about? These broadcasts. They're to gather our home economists, the last of the gals, the single moms who have children and they have to put them in daycare centers, and they go out and try and work and try and do everything all at once, and they just can't do it. And so the idea is to get you to chime in and start putting numbers. How much money do you make? How much is daycare centers? How much is food and clothing? And then from the guy's point of view, how many hours do you have to work in order to come up with this stuff? I was trying to have, I have to apologize for something. I was trying to have uh, a regular schedules. Um, and I was supposed to, I said I would come on the air about an hour and 15 minutes ago, but I just couldn't do it. And the reason is I find myself now with two toddlers trying to babysit them simply because they can't, their mothers simply can't afford it. They can't put their child in a daycare center. One of them is probably a bit temporary. The others, they've got their hands full. And so I find myself in the middle of all the things we're trying to stand up to. Just so it said, uh, I tried to do this decades ago. I have one of those stereotypical do-gooder degrees. Uh, and this little story we have to take a step back, rearrange things along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil. The priest is a good guy and the pimp is a bad guy. And people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people, the very definition of what in our society is defined as the bad guy or malice. And to practice virtues is the good guy. And that's actually a religious argument. You have to put a dot on the letter I in order to make it work. And it turns into a judicial court. You can't have a judicial court without religion. You can't say, I'm going to establish facts that are true as true without a religious star in the sky. And so, okay, put a religious star in the sky and go to work. Then you have a judicial court. That's as opposed to the sophistical court, establishing facts that aren't true as true. And it spills into home economics. It's, where in this camp, uh, the married couple is viewed as a one person, the basic economic thing. And to get you out of poverty, you get yourself into a detached house is what we'll use. You have a living room and a bedroom and a dining room, and you have a economic thing called a household, and that's what gets you comfortably out of poverty and into plenty. And the doctors may have a little nicer house, and the guy who builds the factories should have a little nicer house, that sort of thing. And the common housewife is what they're called. And so that spills into a normal supply and demand curve, and that's as opposed to the other camp. And they're the ones who have a monopoly supply and demand curve. They literally live in the big house, and you and I live in either housing projects or apartments. They're either the bourgeois class or the slumlords. And in the end, they're the same group. You couldn't care less whether they call themselves, those guys call themselves liberal or conservative or communist or fascist. They're the same group. To bum a phrase from the 1950s, they're the cruel, queer, atheistic, communists, and fascists. They're a bunch of queer scoundrels, and that's what it comes down to. So in this camp, we come over here, we adopt those three things that make up God and country. We straighten ourselves up emotionally, which is not a natural thing to be a normal, well-adjusted person. That's where religion gets into it. We will the good of another person. We make money by making people better off. And we do it because Christ, some guy 2,000 years ago died and came back from the dead. There you go. Make ourselves feel good. I'm cheating a little bit. If you can hold enough liquor at 3 o'clock in the morning, well, sometimes I'm glad I can't. But I'll just hold that as faith, and then I adopt this. You're the gal. I can't imagine anybody listening to this because it doesn't advertise at all. But the idea is to get you to go out and grab those gals and get them in front of here and gather our gang. We know exactly what's wrong, what to do about it, and how to do it. What's wrong is courts in the 1970s here in the United States came out and said, we'll have no religion in government. And that was the Twilight Zone hustling moment. They threw out uh, God and country. They threw out a normal supply and demand curve. They threw out everything that made the United States a great place to live. You were a melting pot of people. You tried to be a normal, well-adjusted person, and then if you were married, a good husband and a good wife, and you chose that as a profession, and then a good husband and a mother, and that was a fundamental profession. You got the next generation of children raised, and from the point of view of a gal, you viewed that as a profession, and then once the children got into school, you started to have recreation time, and it's for you to play in those silly tennis tournaments they have. So you would be a professional person, a professional mom, and amateur athletics, and it arranges things itself that way. Same is true of the guy. And so, excuse me, in psychology, let's remind ourselves that the shop manual definition of mental illness is the normal taken into the abnormal, from a cold to the flu to pneumonia. And the Catholics, both the Catholic and the atheist, say the same thing. The Catholics say, hey, turn around, go backwards, go back to the normal, and the normal is normal, but not good enough. You close your eyes without sounding too earthy, sit in a chair, close your eyes, fantasize about the gals until you become sexually aroused. Then open your eyes, look around, do it again, only this time you're trying to get the gal pregnant. And then you'll see a sense of original sin with a snap of a finger. It's just not a natural thing. It's natural. It's natural to head in the other direction. Music is something I use that in the 1950s, you could just feel the music where there was a sense of caring and nurture and loving and I don't know what the words are for the common housewife. There was Doris Day and the Chantels, look in my eyes and tell me you love me or I'll be gone. And then right in there, there was a flip-flop. And believe it or not, if you can go on the computer and listen to music, the Ronettes were considered real nasty gals, and the Beach Boys were sophisticated, hip characters. And then it kept getting worse and worse. Sometime around 65, going into 1967, instead of having suits and long hair, their hair went to shoulder length. They started wearing psychedelic clothes and psychedelic music. And when it got into the 70s, they just got nasty about it. Designer cocaine and getting in all the gold and real estate they could possibly get into. Kids weren't even considered. They would get upset if you even mentioned kids, and they were cashing in on everything. If you go back and look here in the United States, housing prices went up as much as $2,000 a month. And that was the upheaval of our society. And that was true whether it was Harry the hippie or Al the Afro or Donna the feminist. And you realize they're all the same characters. Just to make a point, Hillary Clinton is a pillar of that. She's literally one of those people who caused change in our society. And she's married to Bill Clinton, who's the sophisticated man about town and gets into all the gold and real estate. You think they'd hate each other's guts, but they're married to each other. And you realize they're the same thing. They love the leaders of the Black Civil Rights Movement, but the Black Civil Rights Movement is supposed to hate white guys and gals, but not those guys. And so if you take a step back and have a sense of category, you realize that they're all the same person. To make the other point, if I got that Thomas Sowell right, from the 1960 to the 1970 census, some 250,000 nuns poured out of the convents, and they were the school teachers mainly, and that makes the point that the nuns, the American housewife, the guy who would be first normal and well-adjusted, and then a good citizen, good husband and a good citizen. The courageous, brave, and strong, kind, compassionate, and just, they were thrown out of the society. And they said they would. They said they would push us into a consumption society, is what they called it, and they did. And now we're feeling the effects of it. They'll keep it up until society crashes, and then to hear them, they're supposed to come in and create a new species or some such thing. The long and short of it is millions of people are going to starve, and it all works. It's the one thing you can give them is that it works. It's not the only thing that works. You always end up talking about religion. You always end up talking about the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the other intellectual. It's the other university professor. I use the idea that judges wear black robes because Catholic priests 500 years ago in Great Britain wore black robes. And they really did a good job of writing the law books and setting the standards and the rules of evidence and that sort of thing that said that people who were malicious were the bad guys and people who practiced virtues were the good guys. In order to have a judicial court, the judicial means to establish facts that are true as true. It's a religious thing. You have to it has to dawn on you that the judicial is as opposed to the sophistical, which means to establish facts that aren't true as true. And you think about it, a human being does have a sense of original sin. You really do have to place those thoughts that have to do with sex inside of getting the gal pregnant, and fear and those emotions, and you really do have to tune in like a not very well built radio inside your head, trying to tune into something out there. You have to hold Christ's divinity as faith in order to come up with a sense of free will. In other words, God and country means something. If you want a judicial court, you have to adopt that as a religious preference. Say the words out loud. Courts in the United States in the 1970s, exactly when the communists in the 50s said they would overthrow the United States, courts in the United States came out and said, we shall have no religion in government. And in doing so, they legalized, institutionalized hustling, pulling a bum's rush. It didn't have to work that way. It could have worked the other way. They could have said, we'll have no religion in government, but we'll still have a judicial court. We'll still have home economics. You want to be a citizen in the United States? You have to go through some boot camp type thing and be normal and well adjusted. But they didn't. And that little twist up there, they won't be religious. We'll call that being a Yank. They won't be a Yank without being religious. And they refuse, and they say religion, you have no right to shove your religious views down their throat. And then they threw out being a Yank. And they cashed everything in and became the upper class in a peasant and property class society. If you think about it, courts in the United States did adopt a religious position. They adopted the stereotypical, straight out of the textbooks definition of a satanic church. The definition of a satanic church is the complete absence of those three things we're talking about: religion, straightening up our emotions, willing the good of another person, and those two things coming together like two segments of a line that form the lowercase letter I, and that dot in that I is Christ coming back to earth, holding the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and that infusion. What changed when Christ came back to earth? Well, that changed. They wouldn't even say, well, I'm just a university professor and we're just making up that story so we can do things right. They didn't do that. And that's another one of those things you have to publicize. And so I'm quite confident that we'll be on Saturdays and Sundays. And as it stands right now, at about 7 o'clock in the evening in London time, and about 11 o'clock in Los Angeles time, and 2 o'clock in New York. And on Sundays at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in London time, and about 8 in the morning, and then about 11 in the morning in New York, 8 in Los Angeles. I hope, like Matt, everybody's, I can't imagine everybody's doing okay in Los Angeles, but from all of us to you, I hope you'll start to think positive. You have a chance to get all the hustlers, everything that happened to the United States out of there, the people that cashed in on all the real estate and forced prices to skyrocket to the point where you're a peasant class society. You have a chance to get those guys out of there, and the civil rights movement guys and the feminist guys. And you could just see a clean slate. You could turn around and, knowing all the faults that happened and all the good stuff that happened, if you could just get the professor of home economics, the average gal, back into the city planning department and the guy's version of that, you guys could build a world straight out of Hollywood. I hope you do. I think positive. And since so much of this came out of Great Britain, this follows in the rules of Aristotle and Plato and all those guys. And then Christ came along, and people like Aristotle and Plato, they said, this doesn't quite work right. The truth of the matter is, if there is no God, then the highest standard of living you can be is to be a psychopathic nut living in the foothills. You do all the consuming, and people in the valley are the slaves, the proletariat, the working class, whatever they do all the producing, you do all the consuming. And then what changed when Christ came in? Well, the idea is, if these thoughts in your mind continue on after you die, or some of them, and some people, then the rules change. You have whatever is emotion is in the sheriff of Dodge City. You have a completely different world, and you go out and build things for people. And that's how you get a huge middle class. That's how you get everybody out of poverty. Everything works, and it works so well. Well, if there's anybody listening to this, I hope you pass the word and start chiming in. We need a place to get people to join the gang in the playground. There are 2 YouTube channels. The Priest and the Pimp is the one this is associated with, and there's about 3 dozen anecdotes there. And so we're going to just assume we're going to ramble in the good sense of the word. We'll have a sense of prerequisite, and we'll just get started and go to work. I'm going to, as soon as I figure out how, put an email address up there. And so if you start going to work, if you start complaining, then you can start doing something about it. With Donald Trump coming in, just to sneak something else, you better watch it if Donald Trump gets into office, because Donald Trump ran standing up to a bum's rush, and he did a very good job of it. But be careful, don't go back from the Democrats to the Republicans, or from the liberal to the conservative. It won't work. Ronald Reagan in 1980 was a terrific example of that. He was a Democrat and a union leader and quite an actor. And he had a degree in economics. He knew just what he was doing. And in the end, it didn't work. You have to go behind Donald Trump's back, having nothing to do with Donald Trump. You're supposed to be able to, you can't stand up to a bum's rush by yourself. You have to have somebody do it for you. And how Donald Trump did it is just amazing. He has a chance to be George Washington to the world, and I hope he does. And that said, you have to go behind his back. You have to go to the things like to the Supreme Court. And instead of courts saying there is no God, you replace them with there's only God, Bob. Only the Apostles' Creed is a very shop manual way of doing that. And then you replace those, you get judges who are, I forgot the name, they're canon lawyers and judges. They know something about natural law and that sort of thing. And then it becomes a deduction. When it comes to God, it's called the grand deduction. And now you can go to work. Here in Tucson, you would go downtown, and you would, I'm sure without any violence, they would stand down and go get a garbage sack And those judges would start forming a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they caused. And then instead of taking over the place, you find the honest to goodness Perry Mason character, the one who gave up so much money just so he could defend the poor and the oppressed. You stick him in there. And from our point of view, whether they call themselves the prosecutor or the defense attorney, you just make sure they live in the doctor and lawyer's house and they take Wednesdays off. And they're the ones that play in that silly tennis tournament. And now you're back in business. Anyhow, that's what we're about here. So if you happen to know a gal who's got a couple of teenage gals and she's trying to raise them on their own, or around here, they have some toddlers and they have a paycheck and it's just not going to work. That's very much those people who are right now who are in charge of the Treasury Department, the communists, and the other places in government. And they're the ones that are in charge of the business. They're the ones that are heads of the university here right down the street. I think you get the idea. I'm sure they won't mind paying reparations in this direction, right? Right. I think, yeah, right. I think I'm dreaming. Well, you gather our gang together and go to work. So we hope to see you, and we hope you start typing in on the chat and tell us what you need in order to have family budget, how much of a budget you need in order to get everybody out of poverty and into plenty. I don't mean to keep rambling, but just so it's said, if you happen to be a gal in Tollesbury, England, or in New York, or in Los Angeles, and you see detached, we use the idea of a detached 1950s house because they were intentionally designed as best they could, the scientific way to get you out of poverty and into plenty. Everybody was comfortable. And walk around and tell yourself, how much money do I need? How much is a mortgage? We don't pay rent here. We don't rent property to people. We don't rent property from people. And so how much is a mortgage? How much is how much are groceries? How much is health insurance? We're picking on the gals. The guy is in, there's a lot of that too, but we're going to ask the guy how many hours does he work in order to come up with this budget? And if you can go around, if you can come up with the amount of money you need to get everybody comfortable, you type in and you let us know. And then from the point of view of a guy, if you're driving a forklift in a warehouse, and that's a job, by the way. That would be a job. A professional tennis player is not a job. A farmer, a manufacturer, those are jobs. Just so it said, picture a 1950s house, then picture a young couple in there, go off to the side, start with farming and mining, then manufacturing, then wholesale retail and repair, and then retirement, education, and recreation, and then doctors and lawyers form a kind of lattice that holds it all together, and it's the Catholic priest that causes this world to come into existence to begin with. And that's the other scientific method. Those priests are university professors as well, and they're also the university physicists and the university economics and the psychologists. Just to sneak something in as well, I don't think in the 1970s when they threw this out, they started talking about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and they started saying that they would recognize homosexuality as no longer a mental illness. And the bum's rush there was they threw out this unnatural thing, the idea of being normal and well-adjusted, and the idea of willing the good of another person, and Christ. And that's completely out of the picture. And things get worse and worse, and now look at everything today. There was a time in the 1970s when a Catholic priest was considered mentally ill. And I don't know how to explain to somebody who's 20 years old that to hustle, to not lie, just not tell the truth, was considered an intellectual thing. You were sophisticated. Yeah. Now everything's coming to fruition and everything's starting to fall apart, and it has to do directly with that. They said so. They said in the 70s they would they had pushed us into a consumption society. Now they look a little different. Another word of warning, you better stand up to them because they have some age on them. And if they die off, the next generation is just going to look at you and say, my God, why didn't you do something? And well, we'll do something. So if you happen to hear this and you happen to see a gal and she's a single mom and she's just not making things ends meet, you get her on this this live chat and you start finding out what she needs. Get her a book of home economics. Start in. And the same with a guy. How many hours do you need to work to come up with a budget for this stuff? We'll take it from there. Okay. Good luck to you.